So it's a real pleasure to be here with you today and to be able to share some of the work that we've been doing in Bayer. Of course, I'm representing quite a big team, but this is a project that we kicked off in 2023. It ran through deep into 2024, and it's something that we're continuing to work on to try and leverage the insights. And really, I'd love to share with you a little bit about what we did, and then maybe in the coffee, I would love to hear about maybe some of the initiatives that you're doing that may be similar. So I think the challenge of thinking about where healthcare systems are going and what the implications are for pharma is something that we're probably all thinking about to a greater or lesser degree. So I would really be, I'd be very appreciative to hear your thoughts as well. As you said, my name is Mike Yates. I work for Bayer. I'm one of the CV franchise leads, which means that I manage a portfolio of assets in the early pipeline space. I'm a commercial person through and through, so spent time with GSK, with Sanofi, with UCB, and I've been with Bayer for about 10 years. And the work that I'm presenting here really is truly a reflection of cross-functional teamwork. We've had a lot of global, but a very, very deep local collaboration as well. Essentially, in early 2023, it's very obvious to all of us that healthcare systems are evolving. And these changes could be material in regards to the way that patients flow through the system, but also who is making decisions and how they make them. So our task was really to say, how will healthcare systems evolve between now and 2035? And what key insights can we draw that would help us to adapt the way that we work, the way that we think about asset prioritization, the way that we develop our assets, and potentially the way that we go to market in order to increase the likelihood for future success. The work that we did is some things and it isn't others. So I'm not going to stand here and tell you that we have a perfect vision of what healthcare systems will look like in 2035. Of course, that would be ridiculous. And the work that we did was very deep. We worked with, I would say, probably over 50 external experts from other tech companies, senior leaders in other pharma companies. We worked with consulting houses. We worked with healthcare system leaders, innovation leaders within some of the leading healthcare systems in the world, but it's never going to be a perfect view of the future, nor will ever a point in time estimate not need to be refreshed. What we are trying to do is to synthesize the input from many external experts, plus the internal experts that we have, into some kind of coherent vision that would allow us to draw insights and hopefully to plan more effectively for the future. Now, if I stand here and tell you that things will change, that's not going to be so revolutionary for you, nor will probably some of the driving trends that we see that are really quite threatening. And one of the interesting things when we did this project was the delta between the internal perception of senior leaders within Bayer and the external perceptions of senior leaders who are running healthcare systems. Because when you talk to healthcare system leaders, their feelings are somewhat catastrophic. They see this surging demand of healthcare, which is in some parts of the world driven by an expectation of increased population. So whether you're in India or Pakistan, or whether you're in Nigeria, for example, you're going to see a huge population boom. But in many countries, it's the aging population. And of course, Japan and Italy are probably the best known in regards to the population, the percentage of people who will be over 65 by 2030. But this massive increase in healthcare demand is extremely frightening for the healthcare system leaders that we spoke to. Of course, they don't have enough resources. They don't have enough money today, nor do they have enough doctors and nurses. And we already see the development of healthcare deserts emerging in almost all advanced health economies. And the US, for example, are anticipating that they'll have 10% fewer doctors than they need, even by 2030. Of course, number three, there is a delta between how much you spend and the outcomes you get. US being probably the most famous example, spending, in some cases twice as much as other developed countries and getting poorer outcomes. So there's definitely not a link always between how much you spend and the outcomes that you get. So, 1, 2, 3, fairly catastrophic. And the delta between our perception of where healthcare systems are going and the threats they face and the healthcare system leaders we spoke to was stark. Probably the more positive one trend was number 4. And this is where healthcare system leaders felt a little bit more positive. They felt that with better data integration, with better healthcare system delivery, and with smarter decision making, they may be able to find the efficiencies that they need to be able to cope. But these 4 trends drive 3 points of revolution: a revolution in care delivery, a revolution in budgeting, and a revolution in decision making. So what are they? So when we talk about revolution in care delivery, there's probably a couple of aspects to this. So one is an anticipation that population health management will be employed much more effectively in the future to be able to identify critical inflection points and be able to deploy resources more effectively. The second element is moving care out of hospitals and moving it towards the patient, so more virtual wards, more home care. But the third element is system integration supporting data integration. So we're all aware, of course, that standalone hospitals and standalone primary care services are now integrating to perform a much more coherent healthcare system that's supporting a geography of patients. Maybe in the US, you could also talk about vertical integration around certain patient types, populations. But the critical thing here is that a more integrated system allows you to identify points of inefficiency. So where are the points in the patient journey that are driving maximum burden for the healthcare system and maximum burden for the patient? So really being able to identify these behavioral, these organization, and these therapeutic points of inefficiency. The second revolution is, of course, value-based care. I don't need to tell many of you here who are working in market access, but a dramatic shift away from being paid for what you do to being paid for the outcome of the intervention that you've made. And then the third revolution is all about decision making. So we already see that electronic medical record, smart prompts are probably one of the biggest drivers of physician behavior today. Many healthcare systems are already integrating omics and outcome data into their electronic medical record. And we already see healthcare systems playing with AI more around kind of generative reporting, but the idea of integrating outcomes, omics, and individual patient data into a decision-making platform is incredibly compelling as a way to target more precise care and to improve decision quality. So what does it mean for us? So from our side, we say a more integrated system that is able to identify points of inefficiency means that they will only care about problems that are driving burden, maximum burden for their patients, maximum burden for themselves. So there is no point bringing innovation to a system unless they recognize the problem. So we have to make sure that we're solving a meaningful problem. And it's possible for us to do that in a way now in order to make sure that we're not going to bring a solution in 5 or 10 years' time that will not be seen to be solving a meaningful problem. In a value-based care world, there is no room for no added value, minimal added value assets. So are we solving a meaningful problem? And are we solving it to a meaningful degree? And then thirdly, the AI decision making, if we are solving a meaningful problem and we're solving it to a meaningful degree, there's every opportunity that the healthcare system will drive rapid adoption through the electronic medical record. So making sure that we understand the coding, making sure that we're understanding the prompts, and how would we integrate into that healthcare system's medical record is absolutely critical. So essentially what we're describing is moving from left to right, the left-hand side being today's model, more population-based, with the payer playing an absolutely critical role in deciding the menu of options that the physician can select from. Moving to the right, with the trends in green, you can see that we're moving into a much more closed system. We anticipate much more of an individualized approach, but where the policymaker and the payer is fundamental to the decision whether to integrate an innovation and to determine how it's deployed. So far less physician autonomy than we see today. When we workshopped this with our internal teams, and we worked with a network of around 60 people within Bayer across a range of markets, you would anticipate that countries would see the transition from left to right differently. We anticipate very rapid adoption in China. We anticipate rapid adoption in the US, in all cases led by government insurance and then following by commercial insurance. And even in Japan, which we had thought might be a slow adopter, they anticipated quite a dramatic pace of change. So, I mean, I say the caution on the lower bar, of course, the caution with all of this is that this is a Bayer view of the world, but I would say this pace of change is very much driven by local people working in the market, knowing the market, and anticipating the level of change that they think would be reasonable. So what does it mean for us? So what it means is that in this new model with a centralized decision maker, there's no point deploying resources against individual physicians and trying to persuade them to adopt your drug. You're looking much more at a C-suite decision within a healthcare system to say, are we going to talk to these people? Do we trust these people? Are we willing to consider their innovation? And if so, where will we deploy it? How will it be deployed? So it's much more of a C-suite decision making. And in that environment, we have to think, how do we position ourselves to be a credible player? It's not a given that healthcare systems will entertain every oncology company or every CV company. So I think it's really important that we begin early to think about, are we solving the meaningful problem? Are we solving it in a meaningful way? Do we have the tools, the people and the resources to be able to manage that C-suite decision? And of course, we need to acknowledge that this C-suite doesn't operate in a vacuum. So there are critical influencers that will begin to shape the decision-making process very early. And we need to manage that influencer network from much earlier, maybe, and much more professionally than we've been willing to in the past. At the heart of it, I guess, you could think about value across 3 axes. And this is not a new slide, I know that. But we're thinking about, are we clear about the value the innovation brings to patients? Are we clear about the value that we bring to the healthcare system? And are we clear that what we're doing here is aligned with our strategy, our values, and that we'll be able to capture some of that value for the company? I think we've always thought about patient value. We do this as part of our TPPs. We do this as part of our study design. We don't always think about value in the same way, and we certainly don't think about healthcare system value until often too late. I've been on many programs. I've been on launches where we've thought about how do we demonstrate healthcare system value as part of a phase 4 program. So I think what we're trying to encourage teams to do is to think about these 3 axes of value much earlier than they've been willing to in the past. And so as part of this process, we started to think about critical success factors. I have a cleaner slide in a minute, but I just want to sort of break this down a little bit. If you think about this in 2 phases, one is the innovation check and one is the new commercialization strategy. The principles are, how early do we need to determine if we're solving a meaningful problem, and how would we do that? How early do we need to determine what our TPP, our launch TPP, or our value proposition needs to be? When do you need to have a launch-ready TPP? How early do you need to build the coalitions that will shape your value proposition, but also help you to communicate ultimately to the C-suite that they need to consider your innovation and adopt it in a way that would be appropriate? How early do we need to anticipate market needs? So when do we need to start thinking about market preparation? How early do we need to start thinking about stakeholder engagement? And how early do we need to think about how do we engage customers, and how do we start to think about the practicality of integrating an innovation into a much more centralized decision-making system? And so what we do now is we break our problem down into the development phases. So we have an innovation check, we have a commercialization strategy. What we're trying to do is to ensure that we're using real-world evidence to identify and prioritize points of inefficiency. And this is something that we're trying to do ahead of first-in-human studies. So really a dramatic shift in the resource deployment in order to improve decision quality for early assets. So make sure that you're solving a meaningful problem, and make sure you're doing this in a quantified way, and make sure that the insights from that prioritization exercise is helping you drive your value strategy. So if you're prioritizing points of inefficiency, you should be able to understand, why would somebody care about it? You should have an idea of the healthcare system impact and the patient impact. And those insights feed into the define the value stage, which is something that we're trying to do ahead of phase 2. What does that mean? It means that we should be anticipating the launch environment, and we should be developing a TPP that is launch ready ahead of phase 2. Again, much earlier than we've been willing to in the past, but allowing us to make a better go, no-go decision. If you've got your problem definition and you've got your value profile, you should be able to make sure that they're lining up. But you're also allowing yourself a much longer runway to de-risk that TPP. Stage C is anticipate the launch. So what will the launch environment look like, and what do you need to do in order to optimize it? So start thinking about the strategic investments that will be needed in order for you to support that market preparation. So start to build the collateral and flag those early and long-term investments that are needed. And finally, at stage D, which is basically a PIV go or a phase 3 go decision, make sure that we have a launch plan that is executable. And so just schematically, you can see here, I guess the current approach, which when we built this slide was the old approach, if you will, we really had, I would say, a light touch when it came to projects in development. So we would really start to take them seriously after POC. After a proof of concept, then we'd really start to invest. And the problem with that is that you have a much shakier foundation for research and development investment, but you also have a lot of false starts. And so what we're trying to do now is make sure that we're investing more time, more money earlier in order to improve this early decision quality. So yes, the investment in decision quality may actually go down over time because we've done the early work. We understand that we're solving a meaningful problem. We have a launch-ready TPP. We're thinking carefully about what launch preparation and strategic investments are needed, which means that we're not spending more money at the end on decision quality. What we're spending money at the end on is stakeholder engagement and market preparation. So what have we done? So in order to make sure that these insights are integrated back into the business, there's probably 3 elements that we've focused on. One is the people, one is the skills and mindset, and one is the technology. So from a people perspective, those of you who know Bayer, those of you who've worked in Bayer, we have this dynamic shared ownership framework. So we have to make sure that everything that we deliver is aligned with this dynamic shared ownership model, which means that people are empowered to solve problems for themselves. So we don't tell people what to do. We try and encourage people through questions and through challenge statements to make sure that people understand like the value of what they're doing, and also that they're able to deliver against the model at the appropriate time. One of the really interesting things that we discovered was that very often our pipeline teams were not skilled enough, they weren't senior enough to be able to effectively represent their region. And this is because I think in the past we've tended to optimize TPPs for the US market, and we've often relied on sometimes junior people in Japan and China and other markets to be able to provide input. And they just did not have the launch experience, they did not have the seniority to be able to challenge those TPPs effectively. So we really make sure that we've got the right infrastructure and the right people now to be able to answer these questions on a region-specific basis. And then we're aggregating for the point of inefficiency analysis, we're aggregating for the TPP at a regional level to make sure that we're not launching innovation into some markets which is suboptimal. There's a lot of manuals. Nitin, you mentioned manuals, so we update our manual. You would do this, and there's a lot of enterprise training which goes along with this. And I think, in my experience, people are hugely motivated by the idea that there is a core group within Bayer which is focusing on the future. So really challenging ourselves to think, how will things change? Challenging ourselves to think, what will we do differently? Developing new methods. It's a hugely motivating thing to see that people in the organization are looking forward and planning for success. And I think we're really trying to make sure that we anchor onto that enthusiasm in order to try and change behavior. The biggest challenge we've had is probably on the technology side. So we talk about using real-world evidence to be able to identify points of inefficiency. This is a very difficult thing to be able to do and to be able to deploy efficiently across multiple assets, across multiple regions. So we're really investing a lot in healthcare system partnerships. We're investing a lot in pilot methods to allow us to be able to mine data from healthcare systems in a more effective way. We don't have a perfect solution. We have many ongoing pilots, and we'll see what comes. But I'd say the technology side is probably one of the biggest challenges right now. So, 40 seconds. I'm pretty happy with that. I'd say the future healthcare model, it's already here. It's not evenly distributed. But when I talk about this more centralized decision-making model, Many of you will know it, this already exists, right? If you go to Israel, you'll see it. If you go to many IDNs in the US, you'll see it. If you talk about population health management and this kind of analytics of population data, you can go to England and see this. So one of the biggest anxieties we had is when we developed our model for 2035. Honestly, I'm not sure that we've gone far enough. I'm not sure that we've really anticipated yet where the really leading edge healthcare systems will be. And that's something we want to dig into again in the next few years. But the model that we described, I'm very confident, will become much more the standard, and it's something we should take very seriously. These changes do require a change in mindset, a change in skill, a change in resource deployment. The old ways will not be sustainable in many of the healthcare systems that we really care about and will be must win in the future. And I think the focus areas, certainly from our side, is early pipeline decision quality and thinking about the communication skills that will be required in order to engage the future stakeholders to be more effective with the C-suite decision maker of the future. So thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mike. It's a really great presentation that just you touch on the increasing healthcare demands and also the delta between our perceptions, which is very delightful to listen, as well as that you can just summarize perfectly the core components for the coherent healthcare system.
Yeah.
And as a company buyer, so how you can just moving to the individualized approaches. So thank you so much for the great presentation. So now on, I think we have got some time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. Yeah, please go ahead. And we have got a microphone in here, if you can stand up and then.
Thank you, Mike. It's Suzanne Michel from Clinigen and formerly from ICWIC. I have a question how you define introducing value in health service and healthcare delivery. It's a very old question. There is a half-proven model from Michael Porter on value in healthcare. It's a bit different than the concept of providing incremental value for new treatments.
Yeah.
So I wonder if Bayer has thought about how to measure and define value in healthcare delivery, especially that in most European countries there's a social policy directed healthcare service. There are you introduce the concept of efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
We have in healthcare service delivery particular patient groups like in palliative care. No patient costs more money than at the end of life. And that is something that's important to our health system. So yeah. I wonder if Bayer has thought about that concept of value in healthcare delivery.
I'm sure there are people in Bayer who will give you an incredibly detailed and academic answer. I'll say that for the purposes of this project, we were really thinking about how do you ensure that you're solving a problem. The one thing we worry about is that in the future, a healthcare system will look at their own data. Let's say we're talking about, for example, overactive bladder. And sometimes we can get very caught up in the minutiae of deltas between current standard of care and our asset. But we have to look at the problem and say, okay, when they look at their own data, what will they see? What would be the top 3 or 4 problems that they see? Would the biggest problem in overactive bladder even be therapeutic? Or would it be more behavioral problems? Or would it be organizational efficiency? So let's make sure that at least we're solving a problem that they would consider to be meaningful. And when they look at that problem and they would consider that that problem had been solved to a meaningful degree, what would be the things that they would consider? So would there be a change in healthcare resource deployment? Would there be a change in prevention of surgery, or would there be an outcome for the patient that could be considered meaningful? So it's really value in the way that we're describing it, I think, is all about, are we solving the problem to a meaningful degree, and how would we prove it? Because very often we infer that we're solving a problem. We say, okay, well, we've got this delta in regards to an endpoint, which is important from a regulator and maybe important clinically, but then we infer that there is benefit to the healthcare system, but we don't actually prove it. So it's really thinking about, how do we prioritize the right endpoints and make sure that we have the right deltas in order to be convincing.
Very happy to continue that discussion because many HTA systems, including here in Germany, is moving towards demonstrating a clinically relevant benefit within patient pathways.
Yeah.
And so very happy to continue that discussion.
Yeah.
It's
Absolutely.
a pet project. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for a really inspiring presentation. I just wanted to ask, because sometimes innovation is not driven in such a frame as we would wish so, and is very fragile. To my perception, it's a dream to go this way, to have meaningful, profitable solutions for all parties. What are you perceiving the development for personalized treatment? And basically, we can see that there are only few winners, and majority of drugs are in a, in a bulk to fight for success. And let's say the complexity that is here is, in my opinion, very much affordable for the blockbusters. How do you see the segment for survivals, which are majority?
So how can we get an economic price for a small population? Yeah, I think from a pipeline perspective, what we're always thinking, or we should be thinking about, who the target audience is, who the target patient is. And what we're encouraging teams to do is to think about who will gain the most benefit, basically. So who's going to gain the most benefit from the asset, and that will be part of the economic decision early on. I mean, are there enough patients, or is there sufficient value that we can get an economic price? I don't think that this way of thinking changes that fundamentally. Maybe what it does do is have us think about it a little bit earlier than we've done before. We don't want to find out late that there is insufficient patients.
I don't want to bother others, but let me jump in and say, we see it in such a sectors like antibiotics.
Yeah.
There was a big boom, and suddenly nothing. And even there is a huge need. Everyone writes in a script. No one is there to take a risk to go there.
Yeah.
It's not about, let's say, non-ability, but risk taking, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have a strong view on that. We didn't. That's a huge topic.